For more than a century, the story of us was a simple, linear path, a story so neat, so logical. It was taught in every classroom, written in every textbook. It went like this. First, around 10,000 BC, humanity had its Neolithic revolution. We learned to domesticate plants and animals. We invented agriculture. Second, freed from the daily hunt, we stopped wandering. We built permanent villages. Agriculture created surplus food. Third, this surplus allowed for specialization. We had farmers, builders, priests, and rulers. Finally, with this complex social structure, around 4000 BC, we built the first cities. We invented writing. And then, and only then, did we build massive, complex temples to our gods. From the first stalk of wheat, to the village, to the city, to the temple. Agriculture, settlement, civilization, religion. It was a tidy four-step ladder. It was the law. And then, in 1994, on a remote, dusty hilltop in southern Turkey, a single discovery was made that took our neat little ladder and smashed it to pieces. The story we had been telling ourselves was wrong. Completely, utterly wrong. This is the story of a place that should not exist, a place that defies all known laws of our history. This is the story of Göbekli Tepe. Our story begins not 12,000 years ago, but in the 1960s, when surveyors first mapped this region. They noted the hill, which the locals called Göbekli Tepe, or Potbelly Hill. They found some broken limestone slabs and dismissed it. They assumed it was a medieval cemetery. A minor footnote, and for 3 decades, the world's greatest secret lay sleeping, just inches beneath the soil. Then in 1994, a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt arrived. Schmidt was working on a nearby, far less ancient site, but he had read that old survey report. Something about it nagged at him. He decided to pay Potbelly Hill a visit. When he arrived, he saw what the first surveyors had seen, a dry, unremarkable hill. But Schmidt saw something else. He didn't just see broken slabs. He saw worked stone. He saw flint tools. And he knew instantly that this was no medieval cemetery. This was something else, something older. He began to dig, and what he found was impossible. He didn't find simple graves. He didn't find post holes for mud huts. He found the tips of massive, elegantly carved stone pillars arranged in a perfect circle. As his team dug deeper, the true, terrifying scale of the site revealed itself. This was not a village. This was a cathedral, a megastructure, a series of stone circles built on an epic scale. The pillars were enormous. Many stood 18 feet tall. They weighed over 10 tons apiece. They were not rough, unworked boulders. They were T-shaped, stylized humanoid figures, their arms carved in low relief along their sides. And they were covered in art. Not crude scratches, but sophisticated, menacing, powerful sculptures of animals. Scorpions, lions, foxes, vultures, spiders. These were not the gentle, farm-friendly animals of the Neolithic. These were the predators, the dark, symbolic figures of a hunter's world. This was a complex, symbolic, ritualistic center, a Sistine Chapel of the Stone Age. But who on earth could have built this? The answer came from the soil. The archaeological team searched desperately for any sign of civilization. They found nothing. No pottery, no writing, no metal tools. They found no evidence of permanent houses, no granaries, no domesticated animals. All they found were the bones of wild gazelles and the flint-tipped arrows used to hunt them. The conclusion was inescapable. This monumental temple, this impossible structure more complex than Stonehenge, was built by hunter-gatherers. Let that sink in. This is the equivalent of finding a fully functional Boeing 747 buried in a medieval castle. It makes no sense. The textbook said hunter-gatherers were primitive. They were small, egalitarian bands of 20 or 30 people, living hand to mouth, constantly wandering, following the herds. They were not supposed to be organizing massive labor forces. They were not supposed to be quarrying, moving, and lifting multi-ton pillars. They were not supposed to be building. And then, the carbon dating came back, and the impossible became the world-shattering. Klaus Schmidt and his team tested the organic material in the fill used to pack the stones. The date, 9600 BC, 11,600 years. Old. This is not just old, this is a complete annihilation of the timeline. Göbekli Tepe is 6,000 years older than Stonehenge. It is 7,000 years older than the Great Pyramids of Giza. It predates the invention of writing by 6,500 years. It predates the invention of the wheel by 6,000 years. It was built in a time we called the Primitive Stone Age, just at the end of the last ice age. This discovery left us with a paradox that broke the brain of every historian on Earth. We were not looking at the product of civilization. We were looking at its origin. And it posed the single greatest question in modern archaeology. How? How did primitive cavemen with no metal, no wheels, and no agriculture unite to build a monument that would still be standing 12,000 years later, to defy everything we thought we knew about ourselves? The word primitive is a comfortable one. It allows us to feel safe in our modern superiority. It implies a simple mind, a simple life, a simple world. Göbekli Tepe demands that we throw this word away forever. Let's deconstruct the how. This was not a small project. The site is vast. To date, we have only excavated about 5% of it. Ground-penetrating radar shows at least 16 more of these massive stone circles still buried in the hill. This was a construction project that may have lasted centuries. First, the engineering. The T-shaped pillars weighing 10 tons were not found on the hill. They were quarried from a limestone pit over a kilometer away. The hunter-gatherers, with flint tools, had to cut these monoliths out of the bedrock. How? We can only guess. Using flint to chip away. Using fire and water to crack the stone. It would have taken months, perhaps years, for a single pillar. One pillar was found still in the quarry. It is 22 feet long. It weighs an estimated 50 tons. They intended to move a 50-ton block. They failed, but they tried. Second, the logistics. Once quarried, these 10-ton blocks had to be moved uphill to the summit of the hill. How? With no wheels, no beasts of burden. It had to be manpower. Hundreds, perhaps over 1,000 people pulling these giants with ropes over rollers on a prepared track. Who were these people? They were not a single small band. This was a summit, a regional gathering. Hundreds of hunter-gatherers from all over the Fertile Crescent must have traveled here, putting aside their tribal differences to work on a common sacred project. But this creates a problem. 1,000 workers need food. A lot of food. A hunter-gatherer society cannot support this. You can't just tell a 1,000-person construction crew, okay, break for lunch, go hunt a gazelle. The area would be stripped bare of all wildlife in a week. The food had to be brought to them. This implies a level of organization, of social hierarchy, that we thought was impossible for this era. Someone was in charge. Someone was designing the circles. Someone was organizing the quarry. Someone was managing the food supply. This is not a primitive band. This is a complex, stratified society. Third, the art. This is perhaps the most profound evidence. The carvings are not just doodles. They are a complex symbolic system, a picture language. The animals depicted, the lion, the fox, the snake, the vulture, are almost exclusively male. They are aggressive. They are menacing. This is not Mother Earth worship. This is a dark, complex, masculine world of predator and prey, life and death. On some pillars, we see a headless man. We see vultures carrying human heads. This is a sophisticated mythology, a religion, a story carved in stone 12,000 years ago. The people who built this were not primitive cavemen. They were anatomically modern humans, just like you and me. Their brains were the same size. They had language. They had art. They had mythology. They had, it seems, a cognitive revolution that gave them a new way of seeing the world, a symbolic consciousness. But the how only leads to a much, much bigger question. Why? Why would a society of hunters, whose entire existence depended on finding the next meal, dedicate centuries of effort, unimaginable resources, and thousands of man-hours to build this? What was so important that it commanded the labor of a civilization that wasn't even supposed to exist? This is the part of the story where history turns completely upside down. This is the Great Flip. For a century, our model was simple. It was a materialist model. It said agriculture, surplus food, settlement, civilization, and temples. It argued that civilization was a product of food. A full stomach allowed us the luxury of thinking about gods. Göbekli Tepe reverses this. It flips the entire equation. Look at the evidence. The temple, Göbekli Tepe, exists at 12,000 years old, the very first evidence of domesticated wheat. The first agriculture was found just 20 miles from this very hill. And its date? It appears just after Göbekli Tepe was built. This is the bombshell. The old formula was wrong. The new formula is temple, need for food, settlement and agriculture, civilization. Let's say that again. Civilization did not create religion. The desire for religion created civilization. Think about it. You have 1,000 workers gathered on a sacred hill, working on a Manhattan project of the Stone Age. You cannot feed them with wild gazelles. The project is too big. You need a stable, predictable, massive food source. You need to control the food. So, you stop chasing the wild wheat. You start cultivating it right there at the bottom of the hill. You stop hunting the wild sheep. You start capturing them, herding them, and breeding them. The sheer logistical need of building this temple forced humanity to invent agriculture. The first farmers were not farmers by choice. They were the quartermasters for a holy war, a war against the chaos of the hunter-gatherer world. They settled down, not because it was an easier life. Early farming was brutal, backbreaking work, but because they had to. They had to stay close to the temple. The temple was the anchor. The temple was the center of their new universe. This is the profound implication. The cognitive revolution came first. The idea, the mythology, the shared belief in something bigger was the single most powerful force in human history. More powerful than hunger, more powerful than fear, more powerful than the instinct to wander. It was a force powerful enough to bend our evolutionary strategy, to chain us to the soil, and to create the modern world. We didn't invent gods after we settled down. We settled down because we had invented gods. But what were they worshiping? What idea was so powerful? This leads us to the site's deepest and perhaps darkest secret. Look at the carvings again. The predators, the vultures, the headless men. This is a violent, dark cosmology. And some researchers believe it is not just a collection of symbols, but a map. A memory palace for a lost world. This is a controversial but compelling theory. 800 years ago, just before Göbekli Tepe was built, the world ended. This was the Younger Dryas, a sudden cataclysmic 1,200-year-long return to a full ice age. The cause is intensely debated, but one leading theory is a comet impact. a swarm of fragments that hit the earth, causing global floods, fires, and a nuclear winter. It was an apocalypse. Now look at Göbekli Tepe. It was built just as the world was emerging from this cold, dark hell. One of its most famous pillars, the Vulture Stone, has been analyzed by engineers and astronomers. Their conclusion: the Vulture Stone is a date stamp. The animals are not just animals. They are constellations. The scorpion, Scorpius. The vulture, Sagittarius. The carvings, they argue, are a precise astronomical map of the sky on the exact date of the Younger Dryas comet impact and the headless man on the stone. That, they say, is us. Humanity decimated. If this is true, then Göbekli Tepe is something more profound than we can imagine. It is not a temple to nature gods. It is a monument, a memory palace. It was built by the survivors of the apocalypse to warn the future, to record the day the sky fell. They carved their story, their astronomical data, into stone, the only medium that would last 12,000 years. They were building a library of a lost world. His is the real human story, not a simple ladder, but a story of catastrophe, resilience, and buried memories. This is the kind of history-shattering analysis we do every single week at the Cognitive Leap. If you believe these stories need to be told, if you are driven to deconstruct the official narrative and find the real story of us, then join this investigation. Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. Help us piece together the puzzle of our own past. The idea that created civilization may have been a memory of a global fire, and a promise to never forget. The story of Göbekli Tepe has one final bewildering chapter after nearly 1,000 years of use as a center for ritual, for astronomy, for social gathering. It wasn't destroyed, it wasn't conquered, it wasn't abandoned to the sands of time. It was buried, deliberately, carefully, intentionally. Around 8000 BC, the people who worshipped here undertook one last massive construction project. They entombed their own cathedral. They brought in millions of cubic feet of earth, rubble, and debris, and they filled every single circle. They covered every pillar, every carving. They buried their impossible hill, and then they walked away. And for 10,000 years, they never came back. This is perhaps the site's greatest mystery. Why? Why would a society spend centuries building the most magnificent structure on Earth, only to spend decades hiding it? The theories are as wild as the site itself. Theory 1, the time capsule. This is the most optimistic view. Perhaps the people of Göbekli Tepe knew their time was ending. The world was changing. The old hunter-gatherer gods were losing their power. They buried their temple not to destroy it, but to preserve it, to protect it from the wind, the rain, and from future generations. They sealed it like a pharaoh's tomb, hoping that a future, wiser world, us, would one day find it and read its message. Theory 2, the death of a god. This is the psychological view. Religions, like all things, die. Perhaps after 1,000 years, the old rituals lost their meaning. A new god or a new set of beliefs, perhaps tied to the new stable life of agriculture, had arrived. The old ways were now taboo. You don't just abandon your old gods. You must give them a proper funeral. The burying of Göbekli Tepe was a planet-sized burial rite, a way of saying, thank you. Your time is done, as they turned their backs on the hunter's world and embraced the farmers. Theory 3, the dangerous memory. This is the most chilling view. What if the vulture stone theory is correct? What if the temple was not a place of worship, but a place of fear? A monument to the single worst day in human history. Perhaps after 1,000 years, the descendants no longer wanted to be reminded of the apocalypse. The trauma was too great. The rituals were a dark, painful burden. They decided, as a society, to forget. They buried the memory. They buried the warning. They chose to erase their own history, to move on and build a new world free from the terror of the past, whatever the reason. That final bizarre act of burial is the only reason we are having this conversation. Their act of concealment was a perfect act of preservation. They protected it from history, so it could rewrite history. They built a time capsule whether they intended to or not, a message in a bottle from the dawn of the human mind. So, where does this leave us? It leaves us with a history that is shattered. The neat, clean 4-step ladder from wheat to temples is gone. The reality is far more complex, more interesting, and more human. Göbekli Tepe is not just an old temple. It is the anchor point. It is the evidence that the human mind, our cognitive leap, was the engine. Our imagination, our ability to conceive of something bigger than ourselves, a god, a symbol, a shared memory, a cosmic map. That is what built the modern world. We are not just logical, food-seeking creatures. We are myth-making, storytelling, temple-building creatures. And we have been for at least 12,000 years. Göbekli Tepe proves that before we were farmers, before we were villagers, we were dreamers, we were astronomers, we were engineers, we were artists. It proves that the origin of our civilization was not in the stomach, it was in the mind. The story of humanity is not a simple march from primitive to advanced. It is a complex, mysterious, and often contradictory story. A story of profound leaps, tragic falls, and buried secrets. And the greatest secret of all is that we are far more complex and far more ancient than we ever dared to believe. But now, I turn the question to you. After seeing the evidence, do you believe the old story of history is broken? And what is your theory on its greatest mystery? Why did they bury Göbekli Tepe? Was it a time capsule, a funeral for a dead god, or a way to bury a dangerous, traumatic memory? Let me know your theory in the comments below. Welcome, to the Cognitive Leap.